Was Jesus a socialist? The short answer is no, definitely not. And we know that from the parable of the talents. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about that, a little bit about socialism, a little bit about equity and equity theory and how it originated in 1965 and is being defined differently today. Equity itself is being defined differently as more equality of outcomes rather than equality of opportunities. And so we'll talk a little bit about that, how diversity, equity, and inclusion has been a march that has been seen now in the universities. And we'll go back to where some of this comes from and what the human motivations are behind these sorts of things. But before that, we're going to jump into a video. It's just a little 5-minute video that I found from Pinecreek Doug. And the video talks a lot about anti-intellectualism in Christianity. And it's the idea of how do you convince people? Do you convince people through reason, through thought, through study, or do you try to convince people through smoke and mirrors and emotion? And so let's hear what they have to say. And before we do that, I will let you know who is in this video. So in the video, starting from the top left, we have Ellie Ayala, Michael Jones, who's also known as Inspiring Philosophy, Tony Costa, Matt Slick, Nate Sala, and Braxton Hunter. I have had Michael Jones and Braxton Hunter on my channel before, and I've heard of Matt Slick, but the other three, I don't think I'm familiar with. I don't believe I've seen anything from them. So here we go.
Christian side is we need to combat anti-intellectualism in the church. There's a lot of Christians that are like, I just need faith, or I just need some emotional, strong music with strobe lights.
Oh,
all the good fog and the big mega
Come on, it's a good smoke machine can go a long way.
Oh, come on.
gotta get the feels.
No, so I think we need to combat, because I've been to churches and I've been like, do you have apologetics or do anything like that? We don't really do that here. We just want to focus on winning souls. I'm like, you're not winning souls if you're not including that. Let's be honest here. So I think we need to combat.
How does IP know that? What if it's true you can win more souls for Christ using emotion rather than intellect?
So the big question is, how do you convince people? This goes back to Aristotle. Aristotle talked a lot about several different approaches to persuasion. One of them was to give out ethos. Ethos relates to establishing credibility. If you go to the church and the church establishes itself as a credible source of information, then it's speaking to its ethos. Then we look at the idea of pathos. That's the emotion. And that can be one of the most powerful ways to communicate. And that's why a lot of times you see people showing stories or telling stories. The stories are definitely a lot of times emotionally packed. So telling stories is some way that you can definitely appeal to people's emotions. Even in the Bible, you see one long story in the Gospels of Jesus' ministry. You also see in the book of Acts how the apostles went out and quite bravely conquered the ancient Near East during context, which was very rough to them. And then the last one is logos. Logos is the appeal to logic. And you see that when people are trying to persuade others through the use of statistics or simple facts, things like that. So what this argument is saying is it's either one or the other, but usually the approach is a mix of all three. I think that's the most effective way to communicate. So for the churches, continue telling the stories, continue with the powerful contemporary Christian music. That's something that definitely gets to people's hearts, and continues speaking facts and factual information. In doing the latter, you want to explain to people the roots of Christianity. When I was a Catholic, I never really looked into the Bible because Catholics aren't really taught to dig deeply into the Bible, at least in my parish. And one of the ways that we learned more about Jesus was just to have faith and not to really do a lot of the thorough investigating. If you do the thorough investigating, you're going to find that we have solid evidence to support the resurrection. Among other things, we have the minimal facts argument that Gary Habermas puts forward. We have the idea of, my favorite thing is just talking about the early disciples and their incredible bravery. They knew what they were saying, whether or not it was true or not. Would you die for a lie? Would you be pursued by people in a group from whom you had once related? So you think of the Apostle Paul and his ministry and how he was once a very ardent Jew. And he set out to have Christians killed, the people of the way. And he was marching on his way to Damascus when suddenly Jesus approached him and he said, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? He said, who are you, Lord? I am Jesus whom you are persecuting. So he turned away from his own group and turned into the group that he was persecuting. And then he was persecuted severely. And just looking at that and the way that he wrote the majority of New Testament books, I think that's a really powerful example of one reason why we should believe. But there are others, of course. There's Peter, John, James, all of the other people who were martyred for their cause. But I digress. So we're going to go back into this question here with these two. And I want to say hi to Doki Doki Bible Club. Good to see you. Oh, and thank you for the super sticker. I really appreciate it. That's very generous of you. Thank you.
I know they sometimes are intertwined, but IP, how do you know that? What if it were true that by making people feel guilty, making them feel desperate and low for the sin that they have, what if the fear of hell actually saved more souls than talking about any philosophical argument? Would you switch, Michael?
The idea of the fear of hell, I think that when you're speaking of systems, I think the idea of installing fear in people is a faulty way to try to get them into the kingdom. Telling them that they're going to risk burning in hell for eternity is not a very effective approach. And a lot of times it's going to result in some pushback. You don't go after people with the stick. You go after people with the carrot. Think about paradise and heaven and how wonderful that's going to be. That's the approach to use.
Would you switch strategies? Or are you just so embarrassed that you wouldn't? And I mean, like, that's just emotional garbage. I mean, that's emotional tactics. No, I can't bring myself to do it. But what if it's effective? Isn't this what it's all about?
And I'll be honest right here, churches are very smart to put the music in the church because music is a way to appeal to people's emotions. They've done studies on this. And with the idea of when you come into the church, the very first thing you encounter is people singing in joy, as you do, especially if you go to one of the contemporary services at a Baptist church or the contemporary Lutheran services. Those are two where I'm familiar with. And if you go into those kind of places, the very first thing is this powerful music, powerful song that really speaks to your soul. And of course, that's an emotional appeal. I have no problem with that. I think it should be used in the church.
Like, look at the abortion debate. The most effective tool I think these six would have with the abortion debate is to show pictures of, let's say, a 12-week, 20-week, 30-week fetus, baby. Show pictures of a rod going into the uterus and hacking that baby up.
Some people do show those pictures. And of course, sometimes you can get banned on social media for sharing those kind of pictures. But I think he's correct there. The idea of a baby inside the womb being referred to as a baby merely because it's a wanted baby versus an unwanted fetus, I think that that's pretty terrible play on words. I think that the human language has often been used to dehumanize people. And of course, the most innocent unborn population among us, they're the ones that people are going after now. Since 1973, those of you who are in the United States know 63 million innocent children were killed via abortion. Some of them were killed in medical abortions. Those mainly occurred after the year 2000. That's when you take a pill, and you're usually limited in the amount of time that you can take that pill, because at a certain point, it's going to treat the baby in different ways, and you have much more higher likelihood of baby parts remaining inside of you if you take the pill later, and the baby has to be surgically removed. One of the things they do when they surgically remove babies from you is they'll pull it out by the arms, by the legs. Planned Parenthood has just recently come under fire for this, because there's a woman who was recorded secretly by an anti-abortion group. This woman was recorded saying that she makes sure to go after the neck and areas around the legs and that kind of thing. She pulls out those body parts and tries to keep the organs all intact so that, of course, they can donate the organs for research. And again, so they want to make sure those organs are remaining intact, and they would assemble the baby parts on a table to ensure that they have all of the baby parts. They don't even refer to them as baby parts. They call them retained products of conception, RPOCs. And so that is a pretty bad thing. And so right now we've got about 600 Planned Parenthood clinics in the United States. About a third of what they do, they say 3% of their services are abortions, but yet their income, about a third of their income comes from abortions. And so the other type of abortion that's the more common one in our past are the surgical abortions. And those can be done in a number of different ways. quite graphic, quite disturbing. I think if people just look at the ultrasound, you'd get a much different vision of what that little human is inside of you.
That is more effective than even words. You don't have to say anything after that.
He's right. A picture is like 1,000 words.
Am I wrong? I'm not wrong.
No, but I would totally agree, because I think I would approach your question, Eli, from just a kind of a different angle, which is what Michael did here. Anti-intellectualism and biblical illiteracy are huge.
Yeah. What is it with this? Why are Christians worried about anti-intellectualism within the church? Why do you guys even care about that?
One of the things I like in the church, the particular church that I belong to, is the fact that they really dig deeply into the Bible. And I like to listen to their sermons. A lot of times I listen to their sermons while I'm riding my bike, actually. I have to admit, I'll admit that. But I listen to their sermons, and a lot of times they dig very deeply. They'll find difficult passages. They bring out the good, the bad, and the ugly. And they explain to us exactly how we should view this in the ancient Near Eastern context. And they'll explain certain descriptive passages, especially descriptive in the Old Testament, where they just tell us sort of how the culture was, or they'll explain some of Jesus's works in the New Testament. And that's where the moral prescriptions typically come from.
Can I remind these apologists of something? The gospel is foolishness to those who are perishing. Hello?
That was just one of Paul's prescient statements. The gospel is foolishness to those who are perishing. And that speaks to people when they see you on Twitter, they'll see you in social media, posting things about Jesus and the resurrection. And they honestly, in some cases, do not understand that whole concept. I just saw a silly meme that said, and God became God and killed God and all this stuff. And it's just trying to it's trying to intentionally not understand, or intentionally sort of play on something that they haven't even really looked into. 3 persons, one nature. That's what God is. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. 3 distinct persons in one nature. So it's not God that gave birth to God as the same person. It's God giving birth, not even giving birth. I shouldn't say that. God impregnating a virgin, and the virgin giving birth to a person, the person who is God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us.
God has made the wise things of the world foolish, and the foolish things wise. He's flipped the script, gentlemen. Do I need to remind you of your own scriptures? Why do you have this weakness within you that you need to appear intelligent in the world's eyes? Most people in the world view Christians like you as crazy and nutso.
Not so. Not so. Let us remember, Christians make up about 2 billion people of the 7 billion people in the world. Significant portion of the population refer to themselves as Christians. Most of those Christians are Catholics. The atheist population is really only about 7% of the world. So it's the 7%. He's trying to say the 7% is looking down at the much larger percent of people who are Christians. And that's trying to flip the script on us. Most of the world doesn't think we're crazy. The Hindus, in many cases, haven't even looked into Christianity. They realize, though, they appreciate the fact that there was a man who walked the earth a couple thousand years ago, and that Christians follow him and believe that he's God. Buddhists, in many cases, don't bother looking into the facts behind Christianity, because I think if you honestly do that, you become a Christian. Muslims, in many cases, don't look into the facts behind Christianity. A lot of times they just stick with their religions. And so that occurs all around the world. They don't view us as crazy. They actually, in their texts, they have a very vague passage that refers to the resurrection, that God took Jesus to heaven prior to the resurrection. So the assumption is some other guy that nobody seemed to suspect got onto the cross and got crucified for us. It just doesn't make any sense. They don't realize the importance of the resurrection to Christianity itself and how it forms the foundation of Christianity. But getting into Pinecreek's point here on intellectualism and should we try to look smart, it's really, we should try to be effective communicators of the message. And in doing so, we're able to convey the message much better if we understand it. So you do want to study the Bible. You do want to study scripture. You want to study even what some of the ancient church fathers had to say. People like Augustine, St. Augustine. You want to look at those kind of people, find out what they thought. And I'll say hi to people in the chat. So I've got Ear Review, Doki Doki Bible Club, Smokin' Bass, long time no see. Yeah, we got Christian Carpenter. So welcome. Good to see you guys. So the idea is you want to seek Jesus. And if you honestly and sincerely seek Jesus, you'll find him. He says, ask, seek, and find. And it's a very good practice to pray to Jesus. And a lot of times what I like to do is have that be the first thing I do in the morning when I first wake up. I think that's a good thing to do. But here we go.
Accept it.
Hi, Brother Timothy. Good to see you.
Affirm it. Own it. If you believe a guy walked on water, died, and rose from the dead, if you believe that Jesus is going to return on a white horse to collect his children at the end of time, people view you as nuts.
No, Pinecreek has that view. Pinecreek and the very small, tiny portion of the population has that view. But people of other religions probably haven't even taken time to investigate Christianity and certainly aren't passing harsh judgments like that. Now, there could be exceptions in those populations that are passing harsh judgments. And we can see that coming from people like Tovia Singer, who is Jewish, and he likes to cast doubts and things like that for people who are Jewish as far as their belief systems and Christianity. Or you can see it with a few Muslim apologists. You might see it with people like that, but that's mainly the apologists for those groups. It would not be for the traditional member of the groups. A lot of people are very apathetic towards religion, especially here in the West, especially where you have a lot of creature comforts. So that's our biggest problem in some ways. But people like Pinecreek, I would call him an apologist for the atheists. He's an atheist apologist. He wants to turn people away from Christianity, I think. I think he does. I don't think he will say that, but I think that that is his secret, undercover, double hidden plan, which isn't so hidden.
You should look them in the eye and say, I get it. You view me as nuts and crazy, and that's to be expected because what I believe is nuts and crazy.
And like he said, people are perishing. Sometimes the beliefs, you want to think about why the apostles, for example, were so amazed when Jesus walked on water. Why is that? Well, because it says in the book of Job that only God walks on water. Jesus walked on water. And when they saw him coming towards them, they couldn't believe it. It was just this idea, holy cow, who is this? Who is this person who walks on water? That's why they asked that. He turned water into wine. Think about that. The very first thing that he did was to turn water into wine. And it was really interesting because he also calls himself things like the bread of life. So you got the symbolism there of bread and wine that speaks to the Eucharist and communion, Holy Communion. And it speaks to the day where we receive the gift of Jesus. So here we go.
Stop desiring to be these intelligent, viewed as intelligent people.
And I think that's where he's wrong. It's really interesting because intelligence doesn't directly correlate to wisdom. There are many people who might seem like simpletons in this world, but they're just full of wisdom, godly wisdom, spiritual wisdom. They're full of wisdom about Christianity, but maybe they don't score very well on a math test. Maybe they didn't even graduate high school, but they're just full of this natural wisdom. There are people like that. Look at someone like Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa, I have no idea what her education is, but I don't think it was a very high education. I don't think she went, say, she's not Dr. Mother Teresa. She's Mother Teresa. So you look at someone like that and you listen to some of her quotes, and she was just full of wisdom.
Even people who believe in God think you're nuts. Trinity, really? Says the Muslim. Saved by grace, really? Says the Jew. Exclusive Jesus the only way, says the Hindu?
I should point something out is the belief on the faith and works. It is, we are saved through grace, God's grace. And we're expected to, as we show, we're expected to, it says, you will know them by their fruits. We're expected, of course, to do good works. But the works don't earn us a path into heaven. It's our faith that earns us a path into heaven, and God's grace and mercy. And so you can see that with the man on the cross next to Jesus. He certainly didn't do any good works. His main thing that he did was to have faith in Jesus and to ask Jesus if Jesus would let him into heaven. And Jesus said, I will take you into this paradise. On this same day, you and I will be in paradise. That's the heaven. That's what's exciting.
And you know what the atheists think. You guys have to own this.
Now, here in the United States, just to get an idea of the percentage of atheists, those Pew polls have come out, and they say that I think atheists is about 3% of the U.S. population, and people who call themselves agnostics, that's another 4%. So you have 7% of the U.S. population of people who are either atheist or agnostic. Then you've got another percentage of people who don't identify with any particular religion, but they might consider themselves spiritual, maybe Christians, maybe something else. They might go to church. Maybe they don't go to church. Maybe that's why they consider themselves nuns. And so we have a portion of the population in that camp as well. My parents were, my mom, she was probably a weak Christian. She definitely was a Christian. And my dad, a little more on the weak side, but he doesn't identify with any church. And so if he got one of those questionnaires, he'd call himself probably a nun. I got some work to do before that one leaves the planet. Okay, here we go.
The world views you as nuts and crazy.
So I also want to say hi to Peter W. Hi to Arrest 106. Great to see you. Good to see you guys. Hope you're having a wonderful day. Hope this is the best day of the week for you. Everything's a good time on a Monday.
And the more you keep talking about the things you believe, the more crazy you sound. Can I get an amen?
And that is the Pinecreek video. So let me come back here to the screen. Okay. So I also wanted to mention a little bit about these recent trends. There's a few things going on right now. You've probably heard of ESG, if you've seen that. We've got the idea that a lot of firms now are being pressured in certain ways, sometimes by banks, by people like Klaus Schwab, by others like that. They're being pressured to come up with their environmental, social, and governance procedures or activities or the things that they do that appease people who are environmentalists. And so I found this right now in the oil industry. So as oil companies, they have to make sure that they're minimizing pollution to the earth. And of course, they have to have procedures that minimize the risk of oil leaks, for example. And so they have to follow a set of procedures. And we're starting to see those procedures, which typically would be in a place like oil companies where there's a risk to the environment. But we're also seeing some people who are in other sorts of businesses bringing on these ESG goals and putting those ESG goals into their statements. You'll see them into their annual reports. You'll see them on the web pages. You'll see that kind of thing. So it's, again, kind of kowtowing to the environmental groups. Now, I'm an environmentalist. I believe that we should be good people to the environment. I think we should not be polluting actively and trying to toxify our surroundings. I definitely think that that's important. But I think there are people who are a little bit activist on these measures. I think there are people who are taking it too far and are claiming that we're in crisis situations that we're not really in. One of the things that Biden did right when he got in office, one of his first things was he started putting the hammer down on the oil industry and issuing a number of new regulations. And he's still doing that. I communicate and keep touch with a particular oil industry representative out in New Mexico, and we're working on consulting with them. And they're documenting, drafting all of their ESG, their environmental, social, and governance goals. And one of the things that they're talking about is Biden is still putting the hammer to them. He's still clamping down on the regulations and restricting the amount of output that they can achieve. And you'll see him flying all the way over to Saudi Arabia, trying to negotiate with the Saudis. And that can be a little bit of a problem. because we could be energy independent and our prices would be a lot lower if we started doing that. So the other thing I was going to talk about is going back to this idea of equality and equity. Equity in the past has always meant fairness. And equity theory comes from a person called Adams in 1965. And in equity theory, the idea is you would compare yourself with a referent other, somebody else, to determine whether you thought something like your pay is fair. So if I want to know if my pay as a university professor is fair, I would compare myself to other university professors with my same qualifications who are doing the same kind of job in my same field. And then if I felt like my pay wasn't fair, what equity theory says that you'll do is you'll make particular adjustments. You might leave, you might reduce the amount of productivity that you have to bring your pay down to a more fair level, your lower pay to a fair level, or you might do other things like that. But it was always fairness. And lately, what we're seeing is a lot of people pushing towards what they call equality of outcomes. And the idea of equality of outcomes is you're leveling the playing field. Was that something that Jesus would want us to do? If you go back to the book of Acts, and you'll see that the people who think that Jesus is a socialist tend to look at the book of Acts. And in the book of Acts, what happened was people were voluntarily donating their goods. Some of them donated their homes, they donated their goods, their products, their services. People were donating a lot of stuff voluntarily. Now, Marx borrowed that to each according to his, how does that go? To each according to his, I'm forgetting how that goes. So it's basically saying that there should be equal distribution. No matter, everybody puts in according to their capabilities or their skills, and everybody pulls out equally according to needs. And so that was sort of similar to how the early church did it, although they did it voluntarily. The difference between that and communism is communism forces you into this situation, and it equalizes outcomes despite different inputs. So if I work super hard and somebody else slacks off, and we're going to get the same amount of food or the same amount of pay, that is something that the communists pushed. And of course, that goes against basic human motivations, right? That goes against basic human motivations. And the other thing that the communists did, of course, is they took people's property rights. They took all the stuff and they said, everything's for the greater good. It's all for the collective. Everything should go into the cities. They wouldn't even let farmers keep a lot of the output that they'd produced on their own farms for themselves to feed their children at their tables. Oh, there it is. Yeah, Peter, thank you. So if from each according to their ability, to each according to needs. Yeah, ability is the word I was looking for. So, okay, Jason Torn says the Pew study of 3% of the population are atheists has been shown to be flawed. Gervais and Nagel suggest that the number exceeds 11% with a 0.99 probability. And 20% with a 0.8 probability. I'll have to go look at that study. Is that Ricky Gervais? Just kidding. I know it's not Ricky Gervais. If it's the Gervais I'm thinking of, they did a study on the morals of people in differing populations. And one of the questions that they asked had to do with whether or not he thought it was morally acceptable to use a chicken cadaver for sexual pleasure. And so it was a pretty weird study. But that name Gervais is sticking in my mind as the author of that particular study. And no, it wasn't Ricky Gervais. I was just joking around. So I would go back and look at that study. Pew Research does have a good reputation for sampling correctly in a population and that kind of thing. Actually, where I could go to get that information, which wouldn't be a bad source, would be the World Values Surveys. So I will go back because they actually have asked people what religious affiliation they have in the World Values Surveys. And they have a pretty good sample here in the United States. So if you have an adequate sample and it's adequately representing the population from which you're drawing, then you should be able to have confidence in what that sample says. That's what he's saying with 99% probability. It's saying it's a 99% confidence that this is the number. Okay, so that's sort of the idea behind that. So yes, so Karl Marx came up with this ability. Okay, hold on, I see Brother Timothy saying stuff here. So yeah, so fake human also says from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. So one of the things that you can think about is to whether or not Jesus would support something like the free markets or what Marx has dubbed capitalism. If he would, then you would think that you would see a few things. One is, would you see proportionality? For example, are people given different abilities? Do we see that here in the world? Well, we do. And it says, to whom much is given, much is expected. And so the parable of the talents is very instructive on that. So you see, Jesus gave one person many talents. He had 5 talents, 5, okay? He gave the next person 2 talents, and then he gave the third person 1 talent. So he would expect much more from the person with 5 talents than the person with 1 talent. But the person with 5 talents went out and invested his talents and doubled them. The person with 2 did the same, doubled his talents. And the person with 1 talent just buried it in the ground. So when the master came and asked each person what they did, he said to the first 2, good and faithful servant, you have done very well with little, I will give you much. But then the third one, he scorned. He was very upset that the person buried the talents. And so he took that 1 talent that he'd given that person and he gave it to the one with 5 talents. And so to whom much has been given, much is expected. That speaks to us here in the West. We've been blessed with quite a bit, kind of won the lotto in life by being born here. In all seriousness, we have. And so much is expected of us. We're supposed to use our time wisely, not to squander it, not to do foolish things like sit out in Las Vegas for 16 weeks, gambling away your entire income. You don't want to do stuff like that. You want to use your talents well, maximize your talents, figure out a place that you're passionate about, figure out an area in your life that you can have some passion. For me lately, I've been looking at pregnancy research centers, and I've been researching them and trying to figure out the ways that they've gone about to showcase their legitimacy to the world. And in our country, we've got about 3,000 pregnancy resource centers. Many of them are staffed with medical people. Many of them are staffed with counselors. Many of them are staffed with volunteers. And many of them are faith-based, Christian. And what they do is, and this is what the people on the other side, like Elizabeth Warren, can't stand, because these places, the 3,000, a lot of times they put names like choice in their names, so that when women are pregnant, some call them crisis pregnancy centers too, or just plain pregnancy center. But when women are pregnant, sometimes they see this word choice in the title of a place, and the place happens to be located near some Planned Parenthood facility. And they'll go to that place thinking that they can get an abortion. And sometimes they'll even call up that place to see if they can get an abortion. And the person doesn't directly say yes or no, but just says, yeah, come on in, we'll talk. And so the person goes down to the pregnancy resource center, and she's, in some cases, does not want to have the baby. And the pregnancy resource person sits down. In some cases, they give them ultrasounds. They try to talk them into having the baby. They give them those options and try to give them some hope and provide them with resources. In many cases, they'll provide them with things like cribs and baby clothes and diapers and formula and anything else that someone might need. And so they try to take the fear away from the woman who is having a pregnancy that she did not expect. Alternatively, the woman might walk into a Planned Parenthood. They don't try to talk you out of having an abortion. They talk you into having an abortion. In fact, a big portion of their income, as I mentioned earlier, comes in from abortions. And so because of that, and abortions are very profitable for them. The later the term, the more expensive the abortion. So they have no motivation not to tell a woman with 22-week-old baby inside of her that she shouldn't abort the baby. Their motivation is to have her do it because that's going to give them lots of money. Those are thousands of dollars to abort a baby at 22 weeks. There's no need to abort a baby. That is another human. We're all made in God's image. So as soon as the egg and the sperm collide and the baby is the fertilization process begins, that's what 95% of biologists say. That's when life begins. That is a separate human life from you. Carrying that baby to term is one of the best things that a mother can do in her life. And the thing is at the courts talk about when this baby is viable and say you can abort it up until the point when it would be viable living outside the womb. Well, because of medical technology, originally when that statement was made in 1973 under Roe v. Wade, medical technology has shifted the term to much earlier. At first, it was 24 weeks in 1973. Now, some babies have the possibility of surviving at 20 weeks outside the womb. So that is another issue. And so a woman should maybe have an induced pregnancy in some cases. Maybe she's carrying a baby and she's got some terrible, terrible situation going on with blood pressure that could actually kill her or something like that. In those kind of cases, you would induce a pregnancy, but you wouldn't pull the baby out limb by limb and abort it. So you would be motivated to go into a hospital and have the baby in a natural way, induced if you're, again, you're going to die otherwise. So that's a big deal. Oh, Susan, so Doug Groothouse was on. I don't even have Doug Groothouse's channel, so I will have to get that. Yeah, and Jamie Russell says that parable is scary. So the parable that talents is scary. And I think it's because we know we have certain responsibilities. So good to see you guys. Peter W., Fake Human, good to see everybody in here. Susan and Jamie Russell, always good to see everybody. So basically the bottom line from some of these issues going on today is going back to where the parable came from and going back to the idea of all human life has value. And that human life begins at conception. Accordingly, that human life has value, whether or not it's a wanted or unwanted human life. I watched a woman who said she'd performed way more abortions in her life than Ted Bundy had done with all of the women that he killed. She was sort of repenting about it. And what happened was, she said it was a woman who worked in a Planned Parenthood for a number of years. And so she was aborting babies, and she didn't really think of the baby as a baby. She just thought of it as a clump of cells, or she thought of it as a fetus, or just an unwanted baby. And suddenly one day it struck her, after she had her own child, of the value of the baby. And then it struck her that how come this baby, who's called wanted, has more value than this other one who's called unwanted? And how come when it's unwanted, people keep referring to the baby in the womb as a fetus, but if it's wanted, it's your baby, your son or your daughter. You're giving value to that. And that started bugging her. Her conscience started reacting to that. And finally, she said she decided to stop doing abortions, and now she campaigns against them. But she was feeling really guilty one day over all of the abortions that she had. And she said that she felt Jesus speaking to her. And I don't know if it was inside her mind or how it was, but she felt him speaking to her. And he said, I forgive you. And if I can forgive you, you can forgive yourself. And so she finally felt very relieved of all of the things that she had done. And she felt terrible because of all of the lives that she contributed to, that lives lost. And so it's a real shame. But I think we get those kind of stories. A lot of times when I speak out against abortion, I have to remember, I was also pro-choice in my 20s. I thought that the baby was a clump of cells and of little value. But when you think of the baby as being God's child, made in the image of God, before you were in the womb, he knew you. He had big plans for you. That's what he says in the book of Jeremiah. And so that's something that's pretty important to think about as well. Shifting a little bit back towards equality of outcomes versus equality of opportunities, what we should push in organizations is what is focused on equality of opportunities. You want to make sure people have equal opportunities to achieve and do well. You don't want to try to level the playing field because, again, that takes away motivations and it speaks to typical human behaviors and motivations. And so if you like what the Chinese said under Mao, if you pretend to pay us, we'll pretend to work. Mao's system, when he took all the property rights from people, but he forced them all to work in agriculture. In that particular kind of system, you're not motivated to work very hard because you get the same outcomes as your neighbor. So some of the people who gravitate towards those kind of systems are pretty lazy, and they don't believe that they should have to work very hard. They want to reap others' benefits. They want to reap rewards from other people's labor. There are people like that. And there were even people like that going back to in the New Testament. When the apostles went out and they were spreading the good news of Jesus, there were some who were pretty lazy, and God does not like laziness. We see that in the book of Proverbs. He scorns on that. And St. Paul had to tell them, no, go out and get a job. The world is not ending tomorrow. You don't get to sit around and eat bonbons all day. Go out and work. That's what he wants you to do. When people think the world is coming to an end, and there was a time that, this has been going on through the centuries. Everybody thinks that population, they're in the end times. And there are some people who might decide, well, why should I bother working if tomorrow we can eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we shall die? Well, that's the problem. We've been living in the end times for the past 2,000 years. Nobody knows exactly when it's going to happen. And so you have to go out and work. and work to your highest ability. Realize that to whom much has been given, much is expected, and realize that you should give back according to whatever gifts you have. And you can know what your gifts are. You can know what your gifts are when you figure out what you really enjoy doing. For me, I absolutely love doing research. I love it. And I love writing. And so I thought, and I also love babies. And I love the idea of human life. Life begins at conception. I love all of that kind of stuff. So I'm spending some time now working on pregnancy resource centers. And I've been trying to get a hold of Roland, what's his last name? Roland Warren, who is the president of CareNet, which is a group of over 1,100 pregnancy resource centers, because I want to try to get him on my channel to interview him, see if he would come on my channel to interview him to talk about what they do for everybody. And so I think that's a pretty good deal. So Slam RN, thanks for coming on my stream today. So that's Bread of Life. So good to see you, Bread of Life. We have to plan out when we're going to do our August event. We talked about that. So hi, everybody. Hi, right here. So we've got a bunch of people just saying hi to you guys. Rebecca. Yeah, I think I might have seen your stream running, but I think I was running around. I had to go to the store and do a few other things earlier today. So I actually had to move this stream back because originally it was supposed to go on earlier today. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and close it off. I want to say thank you so much for coming in today. Please like, subscribe, and do come again. And just remember, whether you eat, drink, or whatever you do it all for the glory of God. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.